So as you all know, the other day's patch notes, the toxic spell known as Venom Snare was nerfed. This spell has been running amok in this game with its power in PvE and specifically in PvP for far too long, with tons of complaints from the community because of how powerful it was. Finally, it got its nerf. For those who did not know, this spell with the right build would just insta-melt opponents in PvP in the matter of seconds. Basically, anyone who used it was just completely frowned upon. But with the recent changes to the spell, it has been massively nerfed, and seeing it on paper, it seemed pretty reasonable. But now after using the spell itself, I can confirm it is like purely useless now. But before getting into the rest of the video, be sure to subscribe to the channel as we go over some of these buffs and nerfs in the game over the upcoming days and see how everything stands now, because there were so many changes. And if you haven't checked out the 1.07 patch notes yet to know what I'm talking about, be sure to watch my previous video whenever I went over all that. But let's get into the rest of the video now. So before I go into the whole build I'm using, let's go over the changes of Venom Snare specifically and my thoughts on it real quick. So Venom Snare no longer applies after deflecting the spell, which that was the biggest annoyance thing. Everyone had a problem about it. So many players would throw the spell out and you wouldn't have time to either run to the side and avoid it, so you tried to dodge and then you deflect it, but it would still apply and proc to your character. And so that made it nearly unavoidable. So now you're able to deflect it and nullify it altogether, so that is a massive change. And that alone could have just been the nerf and I would have been more than fine with it. But Team Ninja didn't stop there. They went all out on this spell. It now does about 10% less damage overall, on top of extended intervals between the ticks of damage from Venom Snare. I assume this means it was only going to tick damage maybe every 2 seconds now rather than every 1 second like it did before, but no. It now ticks once every 5 seconds, and the spell on players only lasts for around 15-ish seconds, meaning it only ticks 3 times for the entire duration. This is a massive nerf. Before, this spell could put up outwards of like 1,000 if not more damage with every tick being able to proc. Now it only does around 225 damage, since each of my ticks only hit for around 75 on players. For reference though, before the nerf, it used to hit for around 90 damage a tick every 1 second. So now you can see how drastic this change is. It just made an S tier spell instantly drop down to a C tier. They did give it one slight buff though, which now it increases toxin accumulation faster, but poison also only ticks at like 5 seconds for like 8 damage a tick, so nothing too crazy. So even with these huge nerfs, it still has a few things going for it that, don't get me wrong, still makes it somewhat viable. The first thing is that the initial hit of the spell itself still hits extremely hard. It hits for around 120 to 150 damage a hit, on top of proccing the start of the spell's damage ticks itself for another 75 damage. So outright, just trying to use it and get that burst of damage, you do around 200 damage to your opponent, which is pretty good. And then on top of the extra 150 damage you'll get from the spell from the other 2 ticks. So then the spell itself is still viable for doing that extra damage you might need after hitting someone with like a critical strike and using it as a wake-up attack, but for those who hope to still be able to use it as your main source of damage, then that will never happen again. For the high spirit cost of almost 600 spirit, and that's 600 spirit with, level 99 in metal, mind you. If you only have the basic 40 metal to actually be able to cast this, it's going to cost way more. To me, it isn't really worth the damage to spirit cost ratio. And it's no longer something you can just easily throw out and win, because let's be real, the spell is beyond easy to deflect, so if someone is seen using the spell, they're basically just going to be seen as someone who never read the patch notes and are still using it to use a broken spell. Overall though, this spell definitely needed to be brought down to the level of all the other spells, and I believe this did exactly that. Obviously, there will always be some spells that are better than others, but this was a great balance change for the game, and it'll probably weed out some of the bad players just relying on that Venom Snare for easy wins, and it'll also maybe even bring back some other players who stop playing because of it. For PvE, I can't really see it ever being fully viable really. Without all those damage ticks, it's basically just a high spirit cost, low damaging spell that just doesn't seem to be worth it anymore. Even in this pure toxic damage build, it just doesn't hit hard enough, so that is one thing that is kinda sad about it. I wouldn't really do it if you're trying to just get out straight DPS, there's going to be other better things to use now. So if you've made it this far and are interested in the build I was using in this clips, then let's go over that now. I placed 99 stats in the metal tree and then the other 49 into wood, just for some more extra health and spell duration for my toxin weapon buff. The armor I have on is a full Libationaire Gao set. Its a set bonus that we want is going to be the Strategist of Genius, which gives tons of passives such as increased stats effect accumulation plus 4.5%, applies power drop to target upon successful fatal strikes, negate effect duration on enemies plus 4%, damage amplification upon fatal strike on enemies so we can hit way harder, and then the last one, being the most important, is going to increase damage to enemies with negative effects. So whenever you apply poison to people, you're now going to hit them almost 13% harder. And then of course for the embedments, slap on toxin damage, toxin attack power, poison accumulation on enemies, and then the negative effect duration on enemies so our poison can last a lot longer on them so we can have a longer duration of doing tons and tons of damage to them. So with a build like this, does it make Venom Snare actually viable? Honestly, yes and no. If you're interested in just a poison build because you like poison and it isn't a broken build anymore, then yeah, this is a fine spell to use just for like that extra little bit of damage, but overall, it'll never be what it once was, which is a good thing in my opinion, but also kind of bad. Only because metal itself was already the worst virtue of all the trees, Venom Snare was the only thing that made it viable in PvP. So basically if you want to use a nerfed worse element in the game, then sure, this is definitely usable. So it's not something that's good, it's not something that's bad, it's just something that's finely balanced. When I say something is for example S tier versus something that's C tier, it doesn't mean that S tier thing is so far superior to that C tier thing. Everything is viable in this game, which is what I love. The gap between all the tiers really isn't that far from one another, trust me. And that's why I like this game so much. There wasn't anything that was too crazy overpowered except for Venom Snare, so that is exactly why it got nerfed. And again, the nerf just made it so it's finally balanced. This doesn't make it bad. You use it however you want to use it. Trust me, it's still going to be a fine build to rival some of the others. But that's going to do it for me everyone. Thank you all so much for watching the video and be sure to stick around for the daily uploads going over all the other buffs and nerfs in the game to see how everything is currently sitting and see if the changes were fair. I hope you all enjoy the rest of these PvP clips and have a good one. Peace.